I'm going to introduce our speaker, who is Dr. David May. He happens to be my best friend in the whole world. But more importantly, he's a professor of New Testament at Central Baptist Seminary. We were colleagues for many years, co-teaching some and co-authoring a book. And among his many interests, one of those is archaeology. And he's going to, I'm sure, tell you about a dig that he was on as well. So many of you were on the trip to Israel with us. Some of you are online, and those of you in the rooms, so you know David from that trip. And if you want to go to Israel, we'll probably go in a couple of years, and it'll be me and David leading again. So anyway, please help me welcome David May.
Well, it is good to be with you all and to see some faces from our time in journeying in the Holy Land, and some faces from my time when I was interim pastor down at Joplin, Missouri. So it's really good to be with you all this evening. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Some things, because I have some PowerPoints here I want to show you, some visuals. Oops.
You got to go to that bottom.
Yeah. There we go.
Yeah.
Oh, got it.
All right.
All right, can you see? All right, great, excellent. One of the reasons that I thought this might be of interest, it looks like, do I have?
It's typed in your words.
Yes, I've got this little feature on my computer that I've turned on and I don't know how to turn off. And you can see it saying, he does not know how to turn it off. Actually, I do know how to turn it off. So let me.
It's really very accurate, though.
It sure is.
I'm very encouraged when people don't understand technology, so thank you.
Okay, typically.
You're beyond my pay scale.
Typically, I'm using a little different program tonight. So,
Oh,
hopefully it won't be too distracting. If it is, let me know. Well, one of the reasons I picked this particular topic is archaeology is a fascinating field, and it's one that we hear about frequently, and we have a tendency to romanticize a bit. We've got the Indiana Jones kind of image in the back of our mind, or we hear headlines about sensational find here, there. Should we believe it? Should we not? Is it real? Is it fake? What is it? So, or in the news recently, some of the antiquities that Hobby Lobby, or as I like to call them, Hobby Robby, that they purchased and are now repatriating back to the countries where they came from. So I thought it might be helpful just to kind of set the ground rules, the foundations of how archaeologists go about their everyday work. What do they do? What is it like? And I have been on excavation, so I have kind of an interest in it, and I thought I might share with you kind of the day-to-day things that archaeologists do in excavating a site. So you can see some of the common everyday things. Kind of take you behind the curtain of these incredible finds that are out there. So let me share with you This is where we're going to be going, and this is in Israel. And one of the reasons that I am taking us to Israel is because it is one of the most excavated places in the entire world. It is a significant source of income for the country because they are excavating these sites that tourists are coming to, and these tourists are one of the number one economic drivers in Israel. So that's one reason I'm kind of doing it in Israel. Also, Israel is a great place to talk about archaeology because anytime you put a spade into the soil of Israel, you're going to turn something up. That's just how frequently you will find objects, material culture. And because of where Israel is located, it has been occupied by the Persians and by the Greeks and by the Romans and by different Islamic caliphates. And so it is rich in a variety of different artifacts. So that's another reason this is a great place to talk about archaeology and what's going on. And so archaeological sites are very popular in Israel. As you can see, this is a site that has a lot of tour buses coming into it. And if you will also notice, part of the excavation that's going on here, it actually could go on all the way under those buses. Because typically when excavations are done in Israel, they typically excavate less than 10% of any site. So it's just a small fragment of any city, any location. They're only putting down very small probes into this area. So only about 10%. Now, I'll say that except for one site. One site has been 100% excavated. Masada. Masada's been 100% excavated, and the reason, of course, is political. So when we talk about Israel, you have to talk about Israel Antiquities Authority. This is the authority under which all excavations are done in the country of Israel. It is a very powerful authority in Israel. It controls billions of dollars because that's antiquities, that is related to tourism, it's related to selling things. And so it's a major authority and power in the nation of Israel. So it's also political. Which sites get excavated and which don't? Or if you're excavating down, where do you stop? What if you excavate through an area and it's filled with, this is the Islamic era. The Israeli antiquity authorities might go, get it out, clear it out, finish it. I mean, it's very quickly gone, maybe not even documented. But if you get down to an area that's specifically related to Israeli history, stop, we cannot go any further. And they bring in all the experts. So it's very political. And that's also true when it comes over into the areas that are controlled by Palestinians. They have their own antiquities authority and also their own political agenda of what will be excavated and what will not. So just, you always kind of want to keep that in your mind when you're thinking about excavation and archaeology in Israel. Now, who can go and excavate? Absolutely anybody. And this is proof. Anyone can excavate in Israel. They have these digs that go on around year-round almost, and they are all over the country, and they usually run for about 8 to 10 weeks. Just about anybody can excavate here. The man who is holding the orange hat there, he is a retired hospital administrator. He was just interested in doing some excavation. The man standing next to him is a chiropractor. and boy, did we need him after our excavations. A couple of seminary professors there, also in the picture. So a variety of folks will come and excavate. Sometimes people come for only a week, sometimes for 2 weeks, and sometimes for the all 8 to 10 weeks. Oftentimes they're students, and so they will get credit for their classes at the university. When I was excavating, we had students from Pepperdine University. We had them from Hardin-Simmons University down in Texas. We had some from international universities, the University of Athens. So lots of students will come and do excavation and get some kind of college credit for it. Now, you have to realize this is brilliant on the part of Israel. It is what I call the Tom Sawyer principle. You get someone else to whitewash the fence for you. So you have these people coming from all over the country, all over the world, coming here, paying to dig Israel and to do their work. It's really a fantastic kind of way they get their labor to do what is very labor-intensive work. So anybody has the opportunity to go and excavate. Now, how do you excavate? How do you go about it? Well, I want to take you through some steps and some ways that excavations take place, kind of give you a vicarious experience, hopefully, of the archaeology excavation. And it will be very typical. This is going to be typical of any kind of excavation. One of the first things that you do in any site is lay out the grid and divide it into particular areas. So you grid out the area you're going to excavate this season into grids. Now, once you've done that, then you have to do de-weeding. Now, you wouldn't think about it, but these sites are excavated during 6 to 8 weeks. They may not be excavated for a year, sometimes 2 or 3 years. If you do not touch a site, it quickly becomes overrun with weeds. And before long, you don't even know if anything's even there. So you spend usually the first few days de-weeding the site to get it prepared. And then you can truly see where the grids will be laid out and where the areas will be. When we were excavating, we laid it out in 3 large areas called A, B, and C. Once you've got that laid out, you divide those areas into squares. A square is always 5 meters by 5 meters. That's the standard size. So that's approximately 16 feet by 16 feet. And usually there are 4 people per square who are doing the excavating. Now, if you only have 2 people, you may get a 5 meter by 5 meter, but you might divide it in half because that's a lot for just two individuals to start excavating. So what you see on the screen is a square. It is, you can kind of see the rope line that's on one edge, and then on another edge, you can see that there's a wall at the back that's going to form the back edge, and then kind of off to the side, you see kind of a drop off where excavation has been done in the past. So we are picking up on a different excavation that had gone on in a different season. But this is a simple square. Now, this is a little closer look up of the same square there that you're going to see kind of the depth of where we go down each time. When I started doing the archaeology here in excavation, I really didn't have a sense of what we were going to be doing. I thought they were going to give me a little toothbrush and a little brush here, just to kind of real gently. No. These are the tools. These were the main tools that we used. We used a hoe there in the front and then a pick. That's what we used to excavate with. So you kind of have to say to yourself, what if you encounter something a bit fragile? Well, you know what happens. Yeah, you break it. Unfortunately, sometimes that does happen. But a lot of what you're excavating is you're getting rid of a lot of what is called fill, things that have been filled in over the years. And so you're trying to get rapidly down to a more untouched level. So the pick and the hoe are some of your most important tools to use, along with those buckets. Because you are filling those buckets up, hundreds of them every day, full of dirt, full of rocks, and tossing them out of your square. So those buckets are ubiquitous. There are hundreds at the site where you excavate. Now, occasionally you will, if you do find something of interest, you do stop using the big tools and you go to the smaller little trowels and the brushes. And so you do sometimes do that. Now, one of the things you always had to do at the very end of the day is you always had to sweep your square. Now, you realize this square is dirt. So I'm simply sweeping dirt. But you have to clean it up, do a good job to have everything fresh at the end of every day. Very particular about having a clean square to start the next day. So our tools that we used every single day. Now, as you see here, we are continuing to move down. It's a little bit more, it's a little bit deeper at this point. I think you can kind of see we have excavated a little bit farther. We have removed the dirt. It goes slowly over time. Notice what happens as we were excavating at this point. See how much deeper we are? What did we discover? Rocks. Yeah, rocks. But anytime you have 3 rocks in a row, you got a wall. That's kind of the joke among archaeology. If you find 3 rocks in a row, you probably got a wall. Well, we have more than 3 rocks here. This is a wall that was running diagonally through this square. And it probably would have continued on beyond, but in our square, you can just see part of it. Not sure at this point exactly why it's there, its purpose, what reason it is. So what we're doing is we're cleaning around it. We're attempting to get more articulated, to get a little bit deeper there, that you can, so that we can see it a little bit better. And in the next slide, I think you can see it's a little bit better. And you can see how much deeper we are at this point. When we finished, we were over the top of our heads. Oftentimes, you will have to use ladders to get down into your square. So this square, there were just 2 of us working on it. Massive amount of manual labor to kind of work on this kind of example. Now, what are we looking for besides walls? It's nice when you discover them, but there's something that we found every single day. Every day. Pottery. We found broken pottery, broken product. This is perhaps one of the most important things that you find in these excavations. And one of the reasons that it's so important is because it is the way you date where you are in the square. Think about it as a layer cake. And you can go down and look at the strata that are there. And based upon the pottery, you can tell what time period you're in. So on the screen, you have particular styles. One of the things that you try to find are rims. Rims are important because they can help you tell you what time period this piece of pottery came from, or handles. And you see a couple of handles there. The kind of clay that is used. Is there a glaze on it? Typically, when you see some glaze and it's got a green color to it, you know you've kind of come into the Islamic period. So it lets you know that. So every day, what we would do is we had a special bucket, has a tag on it, a number on it. And every bit of pottery we found, we throw into that bucket. At the end of the day, we take it and we wash it. It's called pottery wash. And it's probably one of the least fun things that you do. You're just sitting on the ground, bucket of water, washing the pottery. The Israeli director of our dig, he joked, he said, he said, it's interesting, different nationalities, how they wash pottery. He said, Americans are obsessive. He said they clean it really, really well. Well, you only have to clean it well enough to be able to identify some of the major features that would help you know what time period it is. But he said Americans, they'll get it all shiny and making it really look nice. But they're typically not whole pieces. They're just bits and pieces, and they might be jumbled together from 1,000 years. If it's jumbled together from 1,000 years, you know it's just fill that's been thrown in there, and it's not all from the same time period. But what you do after you wash it, we would have a pottery reading. So you would take that bucket, cleaned pottery, and we would all gather around and we would do an analysis and say, okay, this bucket here, 80% of what we're seeing comes from the time period of 400 to 600. So we're kind of in the late Roman, early Byzantine period. So you can date where you are in your square, and you make a note of that for the artifacts that you find at that point, for the structures that are there. Now, pottery is a great way to date, but of course, one of the great ways to date is also by coins. By coins. In Israel, it is illegal in Israel for anyone to own a metal detector. Only the Israeli Antiquity Authority has the authority to use metal detectors. And so they will come out usually a few times during the excavation, and they will run the metal detector over to see if they can find any coins. Coins can be a way to detect time period also, because they're very well, we can date coins extremely well. So depending on what you can find, it can be a very helpful, very, very helpful tool. Now, we're gathering up buckets and buckets and buckets and buckets of these pottery shards. And what do we do with them afterwards? We just throw them in a dump. We just dump them out there. So whenever you are anywhere in the world looking at an archaeological site, look to see if you can find where they dumped their pottery. This actually is not in Israel. This is when I took a group to Greece and Turkey. This is in Turkey, the ancient city of Trowel. And while we were there, this is my wife and my mom, and I said, well, come over here, let me show you. This is where the archaeologists have dumped all their pottery. They've done their pottery reading. They just dump it in a big, big pile, leaving it there. So kind of interesting. Every site will have this, and we certainly had our own, and it's still there today. You can still see it there where we excavated. Let me go back. I skipped one slide, but let me go back to this slide. Start here. This was this wall I mentioned. Do you see the wall is gone here? Here's a key fact, key principle of archaeology. Archaeology is systematic destruction. I never thought about that when I started this excavation and was learning about archaeology. You basically are destroying what you find because you're going down another level. So the only way to get down beyond that level with the wall was to disassemble, destroy it. So archaeology is systematic destruction, which is recorded. Now that's the key point, because we will also attempt to always get it in such a way, written down, preserved, that we can theoretically recreate it in drawings or in other ways. So getting the destruction is part of what we do in the excavation. Yeah.
Was the wall only 1 drop deep?
Yes, it was a very shallow wall. It was not very deep at all. And in fact, I think I have another picture right here. Here you can see a little bit before we destroyed it. So it's hard to know exactly what it was used for. One other thing to notice in this particular picture, you can see how that back of our square, we're articulating that back wall, which is pretty substantial. This is very typical in excavating. You will find a wall which is reused material. Now, whenever an earthquake happened, whenever a conqueror came in, war happened, destruction happened, people would simply use what was scattered around. So you don't go out and make new bricks. You don't go out and build new stones. You simply take what is already there and you reuse it. So secondary usage. So in this wall behind you see on the screen, there were some beautiful marble columns that have been used to prop up the wall. Shows you that at some point they've been taken from a temple, but now they were just used to prop up and make a wall. You can find sometimes pens that were made for flocks of sheep or cattle, and the entryway might be an inscription stone that they're just using as a threshold to step into that. So people will take and use whatever they can because it's just easier to rebuild than to create new building material. So,
David?
yes.
When you disassemble and make the record of the wall, does that go to the Antiquities Commission then?
Yeah, that's a good question. Where does the information go in relationship to we've destroyed it, we've recorded it, where does it go? One of the things that every excavation has to do at some point is to publish. So everything that you discover in one season, you publish. So there are pictures that pictures may have been drawn of this, data was kept, and in a particular time, sometimes it takes a year, sometimes it takes 5 years, sometimes these excavation reports are 10 years after the excavation, but they are written up, put in a publication form that is available not only for the Israeli antiquity authorities, but also available for anybody who's wanting to do research on this particular area. Now, anything that's discovered, for example, where I was working in this particular square, we found some beautiful greenware pottery. And it would have been beautiful if I hadn't hit it with a hoe first and broke into about 3 fragments. But they have the ability to put these things back together. All those things that we discovered or anyone else discovered are housed in the Israeli Antiquity Authority. So they have literally tens of thousands of oil lamps, pottery pieces that are stored there. And so you can't, and everything gets numbered so that you can correspond it with what was found where, what level. So if it was found in area B and it was found in square 132, so B132, it can tell you that data so you can match up the artifact with the location.
So if I wanted to know more about your wall, how would I do that?
Yes, you would look up there are typically 2 or 3 big publishers of archaeology material. One is a publisher by the name of Brill, B-R-I-L-L, and they often publish archaeology reports. And they would have some on Banyan. This excavation I was associated with was called Banyas. So it's a park now in the north of Israel, Banyas. And we went there, I don't know if you remember, we went there, it has a beautiful spring there if you were on our trip. But you can get the archaeological reports from a publisher like Brill, looking under Banyas. Now, the trouble with these reports, they're very specialized. So they're very expensive. So these published books like this, usually you want to try and get them out of a library, because otherwise they're about $250 per volume, because they don't publish that many of them. I was very curious about one thing we discovered in our excavation that I wondered about, because one of the most significant things and interesting things to be excavated, it's not oil lamps. They got tens of thousands of those. It's not just pottery. It's any object that has an inscription on it. That's fascinating and interesting. We excavated a small stem of a clay pipe. Around the clay stem, there was writing, an inscription, Arabic. I have no idea what it said. I've always been curious of what it is. I could go back in the archaeological reports if they have been published and see that discovery, and also find out the translation of that inscription.
It was the bomb, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Surgeon General's.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Just another angle from the little site we were excavating. If you notice in the background there, you see kind of some rubble, a collapse that looks like it's happened there. If you're continuing to dig, you have to get that all out of there. You also have to get this monolith that we could never figure out exactly why it was there, what it was doing. You can see it's squared up there. One of the things that you have to do when you're excavating, you do have to kind of pay attention. It's kind of an art to it of changes that happen in the soil. Now you're thinking, but it's dirt. But dirt can change color. At one point, as we were excavating, the soil changed to kind of a little reddish color. I didn't think much about it. It wasn't a real big area. It was kind of like a little round area. It was a little reddish, kind of like rust. And one of the head archaeologists there, directors, as we were excavating, came over and goes, stop. We go, why? He goes, you're digging through a taboon. I go, what's a taboon? He goes, it's an earth oven. So here I have an earth oven that's surrounded by dirt from ages. How did we know? We had no idea. But somebody at some point had built an earth oven there, and these was the decayed remains of it that, again, we recorded. At some point, there was an earth oven, a taboon, that had been constructed in our square. They might not even have known what was underneath them, that they were on top of Roman ruins at that point. It's just a place they settled and were cooking outside. Another time we were excavating, and the soil kind of changed color again. It's kind of a whitish color. We continued to excavate, and all of a sudden, out comes a plastic cup. Now we go, wait a minute. We've been getting pottery from the 4th and 5th and 6th century. Then out came a pair of sunglasses. Then a pair of pantyhose. And what had happened is, in 1967, during the war, they had dropped a toilet in the middle of our square. So here you have this layering, but in the middle of it, you have about like this, a hole that was a toilet that had this intrusion that came into it. So now you have something from 1967 right next to something from the year 400 or 500. So what do? you clean out the toilet. We just cleaned it out because you're trying to get down to a clean surface where it's all the same age. But you never know exactly what you might stumble onto. So there is kind of a skill to kind of sensing, things are changing in our square. Yes, question.
And how do you do the recording of toilets?
Yeah, how do you record that? They'll just make a brief comment on it because it's not something that they're going to highlight. Oftentimes they'll use an acronym or kind of like what I did, a late modern intrusion into the square. So they usually don't spend a lot of time recording those kinds of things, but they will mention the anomaly that's happened in the square. This was our friend, the Dippy dumpster. This is where we threw tons, felt like tons and tons of dirt, probably hundreds and hundreds of pounds of dirt we would throw into this dumpster, which was then taken and dumped somewhere else. Now, occasionally, I don't believe that our excavation did as much of this as other excavations, but sometimes this dirt is taken and then there is a secondary sifting. So you take the dirt, you then sift it for any little things that you might have missed. So these would be real tiny things, and it's easy to miss things. Real tiny coins, tiny beads, small things can really slip through especially when you are putting it in a bucket, getting rid of it very, very quickly. So sometimes there will be a sifting operation that will be done later with these big dumpsters. There are some rocks that are just too heavy for me to lift. And so you do bring in the heavy equipment to move out the rocks, to get rid of them. Again, sometimes one of the directors of the excavation I was on from one of the American universities, he was very aggravated with the Israeli approach to some of the excavations because sometimes they bring in bulldozers. If you want to get things done rapidly, you just clear off a huge swath, but you lose all kinds of things when that happens. So he was always aggravated. But again, if it's Islamic period or it's Byzantine period, that may not be what they're interested in. So we want to get down more to the time of David or Solomon, the early kingdom. Well, we've got to get rid of this. We don't have time. They may bring in a bulldozer and just bulldoze off mosaics or whatever else happens to be there. Whenever I've been there and I've excavated, something like this always makes me realize how close we are to the time of Jesus, the biblical world, the first century. You see this man who is riding on a donkey there on the background. So where we were excavating, there was a road near it, and there in the background, there near that orange dumpster, you could see him on his little donkey. I'm just thinking, this isn't so far away from the first century, the way people traveled, what people did. So it's kind of a reminder of that to me when I see something like that. I mentioned a lot about recording. Okay, so how do you record it? This is the important tool that we use. This is called the Theodolite. And you look through this transom and you are going to look at this measuring stick. Okay? So when you're looking at this measures where the structure was found, where the object was found. So it gives a depth, it gives a precise location. So again, you have the ability to reconstruct location and at what point it was discovered. And you see the the person there with the field notes. He is recording all of this into those notes, and those notes will eventually be used to reconstruct and also to put into the publication. I might also say that another way that we did this is before we didn't have the option of drones when this was going on. Today they're using drones, but you would always try to get an area of what you were doing. So what we used were big balloons. So big balloon about like this, we would send up, have a camera on it, and would snap pictures of all the different areas. So again, it could be used. So through camera, through the recording of locations, using the measuring stick that is here, and the theodolite, that's kind of the key ways we were able to reconstruct, to figure out what we've encountered and how we can bring it back. Now, some of our discoveries are very small. Here's an example of a very small discovery. You know what that is? Can you guess? What do you think that object is?
It almost looks like a faucet head.
Yeah, it does, almost. It's very good. You can see kind of the rim around the edge, right?
Mhm.
See that kind of rim around there? This is the broken remain, the fragment of a pipe that you would smoke. So this comes from the time period around 1200 to 1500. This is the time period of a group that controlled Israel at the time, called the Mamluks. And the Mamluks were big smokers. Now, they weren't smoking tobacco. More likely hashish. That's what they were smoking. But we uncovered a lot of these pipes in the square. I mentioned that little bowl that we accidentally broke. Inside of that bowl was about 4 or 5 of these clay pipes. So somehow they have been stored in there, placed in there, and it was left for us to discover them after 800 years, 600 years. Now there are big discoveries. This is a big discovery. This is an archaeological, this is a structural remain, not pottery, not simple clay pipes, not coins. This is a major architectural structure that no one knew was there. You can see above it, there was actually a road. Usually these discoveries, it seems like they come on about the last week of your excavation. So you've been, your time is running out. You make this kind of major discovery. And what made this discovery so great was, look at the detail of the work. Maybe this next picture. Look at the detail of the stones of how they had been cut. This was incredible workmanship. Now, when it was discovered, back in there, and this one is a better example, as soon as you kind of got to where you could kind of squeeze a person in there, sent a person kind of squirming in there. Like I said, we work with college students. They'll do anything. So we sent one of those little college students in there, and there was actually a barrier in there. So someone in the past had used this as just a convenient secondary place to bury a person. Now, when you find skeletal remains, that raises all kinds of issues in Israel. If the ultra-Orthodox hear that a body or skeletal remains have been found, they will always claim that they are Jewish and will try to stop the excavation and will protest. So typically, you try not to raise that issue. Try not to say anything about it. We were so far north, it was not like an excavation that was closer in Jerusalem, in that area. So we didn't have any issues about it. It's very clear that this burial was not Jewish. This was an Islamic burial. And you can tell by the way the person was placed and the way their face was turned toward Mecca. The way it was articulated, it's called in situ, the way it was found in its context. So it looks like an Israeli burial. And, it's a convenient kind of tomb-like thing. I can see why a person might have, not known what this originally was and simply used it to bury a person in the past. When you continue to excavate this, we got deeper. Now you see where we're having to use the ladder to get down in here. And eventually, not this season, but 2 or 3 seasons afterwards, this is what we unearthed. Huge complex. Now, there's no sign on it telling us what it is. One of the archaeologists once said, what do these rocks tell us? He asked that question to us. What do these rocks tell us? We would say, well, this or this or this. He goes, no, they don't tell you anything. They don't talk to you. You are bringing your interpretation upon it. So just as we interpret the biblical text, we have to interpret the stone text. So the interpretation is, what is this? It has been speculated that this is part of the palace complex of Herod Philip. So that is the Herod Philip from the 1st century, the Herod Philip that we have in the biblical text that is mentioned along with his brothers Archelaus and Herod Antipas. Herod Philip had the northern part of Israel. He was farther removed from Jerusalem, so he built this incredible complex, built temples also to pagan gods. He's the only Jewish person we know of who put his own image on a coin. So we actually have a picture of one of the sons of Herod the Great, at least on his coins, the way he was depicted. But the speculation is that this was his palace.
So,
yes.
David, the thing that you were showing us that was first used for burial and then it got deeper and deeper, was it an entryway into this palace? Is that what it became?
Yes, exactly. This is an entryway into this palace complex, one of the entryways into it. Now, what's interesting is that it's underground. But at that time period, it would have been above ground.
Yeah.
But over 2,000 years, earthquakes happen. Israel is a very earthquake-prone area. It has what is called the Jordan Rift, which is one of the most unstable places there. And so you can have a lot of earthquakes. So earthquake happens, you simply fill it in, build on top, another earthquake, fill in, build on top. Then over time, dirt, fill. So what was above ground at one time will eventually, it seems like, become underground. And at one time, this would have been above ground, and you could have walked into it as an entryway into part of the palace complex.
So how many years was it for this to be excavated to go picture?
Okay, so the question was how many years did it take to get to this point? This was about 5 seasons.
Okay.
Yeah. After the season where it was discovered when I was there, then they did about another 4 to 5 seasons to kind of to clear this out. What happens is everyone gets excited about this particular area, so they start excavating. You notice no one got real excited about my area. We just had 3 little rocks. My area actually has been excavated after we left, even went deeper and kind of they decided that probably it was a 7th century Byzantine church in that area. So church, This was a basilica. This was a church that was right there where we were excavating during that time period. Yes.
Can you see on that picture where the original entryway is?
I don't think on this one you can see where it is. I don't really see it. One of the things you can see in this picture is you see all the sandbags that are used. Whenever you have you've excavated, you've got a wall. It's called a bulk, B-U-L-K, bulk. And you don't want to have that kind of collapse. And it's easy to do when you have just a dirt edge. So you will often see the resource or tool used of these sandbags. So even today, if you go to Israel and you look at any archaeological site, you'll see these sandbags trying to keep that bulk from collapsing. And you can see they've done that. They've done it here.
David, did they anticipate finding this?
No, this was a total shock, total surprise. And that's why they turned all their attention to it in the next season. You never know what's going to turn up. For example, we know in this particular area, northern Israel, in this, well, it's in Mark chapter 8, Jesus was in this place called Caesarea Philippi. This is Caesarea Philippi. This is Banyas. It's what's called today, but Caesarea Philippi back then. We know that there was a hippodrome, big one. We know it's there because when the Jewish revolt took place, Titus took some of his captive Jews, brought them up to Banyas, or Caesarea Philippi, and he massacred them or used them in the hippodrome there. We have no idea where the hippodrome is. No idea. It's never not been discovered. Now, some areas are a little bit difficult to excavate and do discovery in. That's because they're mined. So when you go up there, you'll see these fences that are fencing off sections, and they will have a skeleton head and warning, don't cross. That's because, again, part of the Israeli 1967 war, some of the conflicts between, because in the northern area, you're just right next door to Syria. Because of some of this, there's a lot of mines, and so you can't get into some of the areas to excavate unless you remove the mines. But we haven't found a lot of what we know was probably there. Like I said, 10% of the little town has been excavated. This was just a fortunate find. Yeah.
You mentioned seasons. Are there just certain times that you can do digs?
Typically, the seasons, we typically excavate sometimes starting in May. Start in May, go through June and July. And that's usually when the major excavations take place. There are a few places that do year-round. Now, oftentimes those are sites that are associated with major tourist spots. So they're larger sites, and they're excavating a little bit more year-round at that point. But they often use the summer because I think they get people who come, again, from the United States and from around the world, actually, to excavate. So May, June, and July. Those are also the dry seasons, so you're not going to have any rain that's happening. Once you hit, October, November, December, January, February, those are the wet seasons, and so you're going to have rain at that point. So this is dry season. Now, typically also, because it is May, June, July, we would only excavate, we started extremely early. I think they would get us up at 5:30, and they would just kind of throw a little bit of bread at us at 5:30 because we would eat a second breakfast, but here's your 5:30 bread. And we would be excavating by 6 o'clock, and we would excavate till about 1. Now, we would have a second breakfast at 8 o'clock, a second breakfast break at 8 o'clock, but we'd excavate till about 1 o'clock, and then we would eat, we would do pottery washing and pottery reading and be done, because the afternoons are really too hot. It becomes extremely warm, so we would typically not excavate later than that. Good question. Well, in fact, you're asking some good questions, and I want to save some time here at the end just to any kind of questions that kind of come up into your mind about digging up Israel or digging up an excavation, questions you might have. Yes?
Well, other than just general knowledge, that, oh, we found this place, this is what we found.
Yeah.
Is there any historical or theological information coming out of this that correlates or ties to or supports or enlightens current understanding?
Yeah. A couple of things that the archaeological evidence does. One, you always try to see if there are types of written evidence that can correlate with it. So certainly they use the biblical text sometimes to kind of correlate some of the discoveries that we have found. For example, there's the city of Bethsaida. Well, have we found it? Well, we know it's there in the biblical text. It tells us, so it's got to be around there. So there are actually two competing sites. So they're trying to figure out which one it is. Can the biblical text help us? Can these two sites help us know something about this biblical site? So you can use the evidence to try and help you. Another great source that was often used for archaeology, and that is Josephus. He describes a lot of the geographical, a lot of the cities, and so he can be a good written source to correlate with any tangible material culture that is found. It seems to me that what's most helpful in some of these discoveries is making the people in the ancient world much more than cartoon people. We have a stereotypic way of thinking about them, but you can see people in their everyday kind of experiences of what they were going through. So we don't romanticize them. For example, one of the things that archaeologists have found, they have found lots of people that have gum problems, teeth problems. We do, through these skeletons that are excavated, we can start looking and examining teeth and find what did they experience in their everyday life? Well, one of the things they experience is bad teeth. Well, why? They aren't eating, let's face it, they're not eating Twinkies like we are, the sweets. What they were eating is bread. Bread is ground by rocks and stones. Little bits of microscopic stones are getting into the bread. They're abrasing the gums, and they're causing infections, and they're causing teeth to fall out. I mean, it gives you a better sense of what those people were experiencing and why mortality rate, we can understand why mortality rates are falling. So discoveries like that of how people make grain, wine, where they do it. Some excavations have found that people were hiding their vineyard operations. They were putting them underground, literally to keep them hidden from Romans. So it kind of confirms some of those things that we read about, but also gives us kind of greater detail into what those people were experiencing. I will say a lot of these excavations today are sponsored by universities and colleges. I mean, they are the ones who are doing a great deal of the excavations. It used to be sometimes by wealthy individuals who were the sponsorships of these excavations, but today it's mainly universities and colleges who are sponsoring these excavations, at least in Israel. Yes.
Do any of these excavations ever come across bits or fragments of written materials, scrolls, or documents, or is that just only in the caves, like in the Qumran?
Yeah, that's a good question. And actually, next week, to keep you on, to keep you coming back, two things. One, I want to talk about what are the key discoveries that have been made, archaeological, what are key ones that have been made? And two, what about looting? Looting is the third most illegal activity in the world. It's hard to believe. Behind only drugs and guns. Then it's antiquities. It's a billion-dollar industry out there. So we're going to talk about looting, but also we'll talk about some of the archaeological finds that have been made. The fragments, written fragments. We often find inscriptions, but they're stone, or they are on pottery shards. We often do find writing that's been done on pottery shards. It's broken. Someone may use it to kind of practice their letters on. We've found some things like that. Paper things like papyrus or vellum to writing materials, those are a lot rarer to find. They are still finding some, but they're in the caves. And at this point, they are simply finding them by way of sifting. So they are digging through the soil, putting it in sifters, sifting. So you might be coming up with fragments that are extremely tiny, smaller than a dime. So there are no big ones that are being discovered. Ironically, where we're discovering some of our best manuscripts, writings, libraries. They have been discovered. They've been put into libraries in the 1880s, 1890s, mislabeled, forgotten. It is fascinating that some of the biggest discoveries that people are making now are things that had already been discovered once and are being rediscovered today. So some of my friends who work in the area of textual issues, manuscripts, they often say the best place to find manuscripts is the libraries because you're rediscovering some of them. Other questions that might come to your mind? Yeah.
In the Southwest U.S., there's also a lot of archaeology going on. And some of the information that is gleaned from the refuse piles, the mids,
Yes.
you can determine so much about the life. Are there areas in here that they come across where they threw their trash? Other than just pots, but everything else, bones of animals, whatever.
Yes. One of the areas they have done this is in Qumran. The Qumran community, they have excavated their toilets. And so we know the kind of diseases that they actually were carrying back then. So, and that becomes actually a very specialized form of archaeology, so that you have these individuals who are just kind of analyzing that particular discovery, those the toilets that existed in that day and age and what was in there. But yes, they are doing that. It's truly no stone is left unturned in Israel when you think about the things that they are excavating. Even the skins of animals, for example, the skins that are used for the Dead Sea Scrolls, they're doing DNA tests on those. What do those DNA tests tell us? They tell us now the kinds of animals that were used. Did they use cattle or did they use sheep? Did they use goats? Which ones did they use? And what does that tell us about what was being raised or what was being brought in to this group? So the specialization in archaeology is really, over the last 50 years, 60 years, it's been incredible.
Thanks, Dan.
Yeah, thank you.
Safe travels, everybody.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you, David.
I mentioned before that